Presentation organized. Hi everyone, welcome to tonight's presentation organized by the KRTP. I'm Matthew Polinsky. I'm the lead of the Manitoba Tech Transfer Program. And so tonight we've organized this webinar with the help of Brad Hogg and his YouTube channel, That Bee Man. Brad is also the president of the Red River Apiarist Association, and we're also streaming on their channel. So now that the weather is warming up and we've all gotten into our hives, we're thinking about how we can get things right this season and what new things we can try. For that reason, we thought it'd be very suitable to bring you content that you can put into use right now. That said, doing any type of careful and reliable observations in our apiaries takes forethought and planning, which is what our guest is going to lead us through. So we're happy that seasoned beekeeper and researcher Lynae Ovinge will present tonight on how beekeepers can do research, practical ways to find solutions in your operation. Lynae operates Buzzworthy Solutions, where she provides contract consulting services to the beekeeping and bee research community. She grew up on a mixed grain cattle farm in southern Alberta and learned beekeeping on commercial honey farms. Lynae has a Master's of Science from the University of Alberta and has spent many years studying honeybee health and canola pollination with Dr. Shelley Hoover in Lethbridge. Her experience also includes temporary roles as an apiary inspector, Alberta provincial apiculturist, and lead of the Alberta Beekeepers Tech Transfer Program. So before we begin, the last thing I will note is that this will be available online for replay on our YouTube channels, and that as questions come to you, we'll just ask you to sit on them for the moment, and near the end of the presentation, you can write them into the YouTube chat. Questions from each different YouTube channel funnel into our hosting platform, and we'll pose them to our guest at the end. So now I'm going to turn over the floor to Lynae. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. Just need to bring up my thing. All right. Yes, so I'm very excited to be talking with you all about how beekeepers can do research. I've given this presentation one time before in Edmonton, and this is kind of a new, larger version of it with some new beekeeper data. So that's really exciting, and you'll enjoy seeing that, I'm sure. Sorry, I just need to figure out how to make my slides go forward. Always problems, apparently. Okay, I'm gonna try to redo that. There we go. All right. So because I've never talked to beekeepers from Manitoba before, I'd like to give you a little bit of rundown who I am. Now, Matthew read some of it.
Lynae, you're not seeing your presentation on the screen now.
Oh, you are?
No, we're not seeing. You're not sharing it. Your sharing ended, so you have to reshare it.
I see. Okay, is that what was maybe going on? Okay. Let's see. Present. Share screen. Screen. Entire screen. I've got to have this. Gotta have this. This one. All right. We good now?
Looks good.
Okay.
Thanks.
I'll go back. Okay. I guess you guys heard my preamble though, so I'll skip away from this one. Yeah. So never talked to beekeepers from Manitoba before, and so I'll let you know a little bit about me. So I'm a little bit rare as a bee researcher in that I began in commercial beekeeping. So this is a picture of me. Jerry Pullman is a beekeeper near Fort Macleod. So I put the star there where it is on the Alberta map. And this is me at his uncapper line when I was much younger. And then I also moved bees into pollination with him. And so there's a picture. And just right away, this is kind of what got me into bee research, was moving bees with Jerry every night and talking about the questions he had in his operation from the perspective of an owner and of a large beekeeping operation. And so after that, I moved up to Edmonton and got my master's from the U of A. And I also got to work as an inspector for Alberta Agriculture and Forestry. Just changing my pointer. And so at that time, I got to inspect all of this area. And that was super valuable because I got to see so many different bee farms go from one bee farm to so many, and really realize that in beekeeping, there's no one way to skin a cat. There's no one right way to do everything. And that really broadened my horizon. And I really enjoyed that time. I was fortunate later on that Shelley Hoover was starting a new bee lab down in Lethbridge, so I got to go work for her. We did a lot of canola research. She later moved to the U of L from the government of Alberta, and I still work with her part-time. And so that was really great experience as well. And during this time, I really worked broadly with like about 4 different honey farms in the south, focusing on canola pollination. So I've really gotten to know those 4 farms really well and how they do research in their operations. Later on, I was spent the year as the head of the Alberta Tech Transfer Program. So that's right up there in Edmonton. I was in Lethbridge though, thankfully. And again, that kind of broadened my perspective from the few beekeepers I work with to like all the beekeepers who were part of the commission. And I spent a lot of time talking with different beekeepers about the questions that they had. And I realized, that there's a lot of beekeepers doing research in different ways. And I think there's information there to share. And now I run Buzzworthy Solutions, which is a little consulting and contracting business for about the last year. And I actually work directly with a couple of beekeepers doing research for them. And so that's really helped me to get into their operations and see what their needs are. So as that preamble probably showed you, is that How Beekeepers Can Do Research is a talk that I've been kind of formulating in my head my entire career. And I'm glad to, be here and be giving it. And I really have to say, I learned a lot from all these beekeepers and give them 100% of the credit for sharing information with me and answering my question. And another big reason I have for doing this talk is as beekeepers, you really get to experience, us researchers standing on the stage at your bee meetings, and we show you how we do research, and that's really your exposure to research. And those methods are great for us researchers to answer our questions, but not all of them translate that well to the context of commercial beekeeping, which, having done it, I know that it's incredibly busy and fast, and that you really need efficient ways of doing things. So what kind of research am I talking about when I say research? I just need to define that. I'm talking about on-farm field trials that use controls. We're going to talk about controls a couple times. That evaluate new products, evaluate your inputs that help you maximize your bee health, but really just simple research that helps you make decisions. That's what I'm passionate about. And I'm not talking about, stuff for publishing that we scientists do, just simple research that helps you make decisions. And so I want to start off, if you are thinking there, oh no, she's going to make me get out my clipboard. I'm not here to tell you to start recording data. I'll show you lots of different ways to do research. It doesn't have to involve recording data. And I have a lot of respect for how beekeepers already do research in their operations. And a lot of that is through using their own judgment about how, something worked. But as I said, we'll go on this again, but please, please, please use a control. So here's my outline. We're going to go over some experimental design. And again, the real key for this part is experimental design that works for your operation. That's important to me. And controls. I've got some measurements and some other tips that we can talk about. And then we'll go through some more research ideas that might work for you. So we're going to talk about experimental design. Throughout it, I'm going to use this little graphic. Each of these square boxes is a hive. So this is a yard of 40 hives. And I'll use this to help me explain things throughout. And this is kind of standard way they might be arranged in Alberta. And so the first experimental design I want to talk about, I've called it within palette. So if you see this yard of 40 hives, we've got some are green. We would maybe call those the treatment ones. Then the grays are the controls. So on a palette, we'll have hives of both the treated group and the control group. So that's what I mean by within palette. So this is a design that's used by researchers a lot. I mean, when you see us present, this might be the only design you've ever seen us present. And there's lots of different ways to distribute the treatments and things. But it really does require labeling. Usually you have to label each hive so that there's no confusion. And generally, when you're doing a design like this, you're going to be actually recording data about each hive. So you need to have those sheets out. You just need one apiary to do it. And it's not great for Varroa trials. And I just want to explain that, when we have Varroa, and let's say this treatment worked really well and this one didn't, this mite bomb is essentially going to reinvade into this hive. So generally, when we do Varroa trials, we don't want that kind of design. So my questions, I've got nothing against this way of doing research. It's how I do research as a beekeeper, and I know, or as a researcher, and I know that there's beekeepers that use this method too. So, if you're using this method, you guys still hear me? Something's just happened with my headphones. Hello? Oh.
Yeah, we still hear you. Sorry, I was muted.
Oh, you're still hearing me for sure?
Still hearing you.
Okay, sorry for that pause.
No problem.
Yeah, so my main question is, I got nothing against beekeepers that use this design, and if you are, stay ahead. But I think that there's a lot of commercial beekeepers that this amount of tinkering just is not going to work within how they do things. And so, do you have time to do this? To be labeling hives, to be recording data like that? Is a design like this a barrier to you doing research? Does this limit the size of your trial? So when I do a trial like this, I can only run about 120 hives before it gets a bit out of control for me. So, if those answers are true, I've got some other experimental designs that will work. Again, I want to say there's nothing wrong with the within palette, but we have the option to go in these other designs, which one I'll call half apiary, but where we treat one half of an apiary with a treatment, the other half of the apiary with a control, to kind of simplify things commercially. And then also we'll go over between apiaries design, where we'll treat one whole apiary and we'll have a whole other apiary as a control. And so if you're wanting to transition from that, within palette design to these larger experimental designs, you need to have a few things. For one, you have to have larger sample sizes because we need to deal with the variability in a different way. So we need to have big sample sizes. We can't be doing this in just one apiary. And we have to have consistent commercial beekeeping. So what I mean by that is, when I did commercial beekeeping, I go to 8 yards a day. We did the exact same thing to all 8 of those yards. And, there was 4 other crews doing the exact same thing. If that's the kind of way that your operations ran, that these designs will work well for you. But if, say you're moving all your favorite hives to the left sides of your yards, or something more like, you're trying to compare a yard of nukes with a yard of doubles, those are some things where you'll have to look out for. But we need to have consistent commercial beekeeping where everything's really done the same so that we can compare whole apiaries. And some advantages of switching to these designs. One is the Varroa trials. As I said, we need some isolation for those. So with these designs, as long as your 2 halves of your apiaries have a bit of a buffer, we're probably not going to see much mite movement between those 2 halves. It's also easier. Most beekeepers are just way more likely to do these 2 types of designs. And like I said, I have a lot of respect for that beekeeper judgment. And it's a lot easier as a beekeeper when you're just moving from this side of the yard to that side of the yard to be like, okay, yeah, that side was better. Or this apiary to that apiary to say, okay, that one was better, than to do it, when you're each hive in a pallet, you have to read the tag. Okay, it's this one, and figure out a difference, right? It was easier for beekeepers to see trends. Oh, I think I do this way. So we're going to start talking, I should say, we're going to start with the between apiaries, which is the big design. And this is really not frequently used by researchers. There's a few reasons why they do it, but for the most part, they're using other designs. But I do find when I talk to beekeepers, it's a popular choice that they're using. It's really easy to delegate. In commercial beekeeping, things have to be, you have to be able to delegate. There's less chance of errors. You're not having to label, and the measurements are easier because you can do types of measurements that'll go off the whole yard if you'd like. But one thing I got to say is you really have to count for the geographic factors, which might be obvious, but I want to say this. So you cannot compare your 20 yards west of the highway with your 20 yards that are treated with something different east of the highway. You need to intersperse the treatments and the controls throughout your area. And because we all know there's a large amount of variability between yards, some yards, they've got better spring pollen, or they produce more honey, or they winter better. We have to use those larger sample sizes in order to account for that. So, we're wanting to be using at least, 6 yards of each when you're doing this type of design. And so I want to get right into an example for you that I think you guys will find intriguing for sure. I found it intriguing. And so this is a beekeeper I work for, and he had this question 2 years ago, which was in the fall, which of these chemicals work best for him? And he's actually used Formic Pro in the past before, and he wanted to try HopGuard and Thymovar. And so he applied them to different apiaries in the between apiaries type design. And he did this to 266 apiaries. So I know right away you guys are all thinking, well, how do you do this? He's not doing mite washes on that many apiaries. And he simply did it by recording the number of deads in the spring, which I really want to underscore how easy this was for him. He simply had to write down which yards got which treatments and his winter kill in the spring for each of the yards. And I would say that these are things that most of you are already writing down. A lot of us write down the number of deads in each bee yard because that way we know how many live hives to bring back to those bee yards. So we'll get into the data here, but so on the left, I just want to say we've got the number of dead outs in spring 2020 in 2023. So this is out of 40. So he's got yards of 40, just like in the picture. So this is not percent deads, okay? And then in the bottom here, we've got Formic, HopGuard, and Thymovar. And this is what he found. And so this is, and each of these dots, I got to say, so researchers, when we normally give you results, we'll give you these bar graphs. So each of these lines is an average, okay? And this would normally be a bar, and this is a bar, and this is a bar. But I like to show all the data. And so each of these is an apiary, a bee yard. And so this green one here, it had something like 32 deads in it. This one for Thymovar was maybe something like 28. And so that way you can see all the data and really see the trends. And so, in this example, he got the data and was able to say, okay, we're going to toss out HopGuard. We're not going to use that as a fall treatment anymore, and we're going to go forward with Thymovar and Formic Pro. And so this was a way he was able to leverage, this experimental design to get some answers for him in his commercial operation. So if you're thinking, well, that seems like a great way of doing research, that's what I want to do. Right now, I'll just talk about some other ideas I have for these mortality or survival type experiments. Now, obviously, we want to do non-risky things because he didn't know that HopGuard was going to cause him some extra deads. But obviously, there was a cost to putting this treatment on compared to if he just put this one on, right? So we want to be doing non-risky things that are advertised when you're buying these things to help your bees winter better, okay? So any kind of fall treatments or supplements are a good idea for these things because Measuring things in the fall isn't very easy. The hives are already getting smaller at that time. We're feeding them at that time. The varroa mites are going the other way. So doing measurements is fairly tricky in fall, but one thing you really can measure is simply, did that thing help more bees survive? But like I said, you have to use some pretty large sample sizes on a metric like this. And another idea would be queen stocks. And I know there's lots of beekeepers that already are tracking the number of deads that they'll get off of different types of queens. And so if we go back to our types of experimental designs, we've done this one, we've done this one. Now we're going to go into our half apiary. So the big reason to do this one is it removes the geographic variability between bee yards. So as we all know, I already said this, that certain yards will have better pollen or whatever. So this is a really great one, especially for something like pollen patties, because it can vary so widely between yards. Labeling isn't necessary. It might be, but as long as you are really good at keeping things straight, you might not have to label the halves. It's also pretty easy to just label halves without labeling every hive. It also works with how bee yards are naturally set up. I'm not saying all bee yards are set up like this. Sometimes they are just in a long line, but a lot of them will have a break in the middle, so it works well. It's also generally good for varroa experiments because we will have a break between two groups of hives. And so I've got a trick for this design that comes from Reese Chandler of Scandia Honey. What he does these designs to do research in his operation, and what he does is that the driver's side of the truck, so if you see this, here's where the truck gets parked at this bee yard every time. The driver's side is always the treated group for him, and the passenger side is always the control because the driver's taking, care of the treatments. And that's just a trick that he's found. And he, generally he'll use about 6 bee yards and he'll do these designs. And then he and his team will go through and they'll evaluate the two sides of the yards. They just use their own judgment and they make a call and decide, how to proceed and what's the outcome of that experiment. But so that works well for him. For this one, I just got to say again, we want to have larger sample sizes, 6 yards. And also you got to pay, I don't know if any of you are so fortunate to have all of your bee yards face east or something like that. But obviously if they're all facing east, then if you're using this trick, all the left ones are going to be the south side. And sometimes we get, drifting one way or the other in yards. So you want to make sure you're getting a good mix of the different directions that yards are facing. And you're also using this on larger sample sizes, right? So that's it for experimental design. I just want to go back to this and say that there's, no right way or wrong way. I just want to, present options that can work within commercial operations. And, I know really large beekeepers that use each of these designs, and that's, that's what works for them. And that's how they move forward and they can find answers in their own operation. Now I said I was done with experimental design, but I do have another completely different type of one that can be useful in certain situations I want to tell you about, and we're going to call it within hive. And essentially it's a choice test. So these feeders are really popular in Alberta. Not everyone uses them, but quite a few of them have a division. And so this is an example where we can offer the bees a choice between this side and that side. We could do the same thing with open barrel feeding, try to pick 2 black barrels, put them right beside each other, or 2 barrels the same color, and see which ones the bees eat better. Okay, so we offer the bees a choice, and that gives us information about one thing essentially, and that's, will they take this down, or how fast will they take this down? So some options here. There's all sorts of feeding stimulants on the market. It's kind of bewildering. This is an easy way to see which one of those works best in your operation. There's also different types of sugar, right? And I know in Manitoba, you have more options than we do. So that's another way to just, okay, someone wants to sell me some sketchy stuff. Will the bees even eat this, right? Another option for choice tests is pollen supplements or pollen patties. This is an experiment I did with Shelley where we actually offered them a choice of 3 different ones. And obviously you can do the same thing in the bulk feeder, but a few years ago they were selling some weird green patties that the bees wouldn't eat at all. So before you put green patties on 1,000 hives, you can just try them out using a choice test and figure out, okay, will the bees take them down? So the advantages for these, like I said, it's really useful for any kind of new product you just want to try out before you put on a large number of hives. I really like it for that. And because it's being done on the same hive, it has a lot of power. So really, you can just do this on 10 hives. It's that easy. Or if you're doing it in the barrels, obviously maybe 10 bee yards. But it's pretty simple. And then, it's just a simple measurement. Obviously, have they consumed it or not? Disadvantages, it's limited usefulness. It'll only let you know, will they take this down? But there's times when that's really useful for your operation, right? And bees, despite what some people may say, are not all knowing. So just because they eat more of something does not mean that they know that that thing's better for them. So we don't know that, it's necessarily healthier. And you also have to check frequently. So if you come back in 3 weeks and both things are done, you really haven't learned anything. All right, so I'm gonna have some water here a sec. This is an image that maybe some of you farmers are familiar with that I've always loved. But here I've changed it to say that one of them is saying to the other, I gave ape a surprise to 10,000 hives and they wintered great. And, that's my word for whatever bee treatment we're getting next. They all seem to start with APA. But, this is just, I don't want to, shame anyone, call anyone out. And I would imagine every commercial beekeeper watching this at one point in his life has given the same thing to every single one of his hives without leaving a control group to see how it actually affected or what the effect of it was. And, there was years, I remember when Apivar became legal and, everyone wanted to put that on every hive they could and try to save them, right? So there's years when it makes sense. But I just really want to point out that, when you do something like that, you're not using a control group. And so you don't really get all the information you could be getting. So by using controls, you really do get better answers. So, I just say, well, normally if you're just trying APA surprise out, you're really relying on your previous knowledge of how your bees winter and comparing it to that. So you're really comparing between years, which is kind of a hard thing to do. We all know that bees change a lot. So by using a control, you can say, okay, APA surprise worked better than APA var. Okay. You can also be more confident in your choice. I'm way more confident in APA surprise because I know it worked better than APA var. And you can also calculate the return on your investment. So in the case of deads, APA surprise, I had way more live hives than APA, APA var. And then you can, figure out, what that treatment costs you and what it's delivering in your operation. And so there's a lot of pros to using controls, but obviously the big con and the reason why a lot of you don't, and again, I'm well aware of the context of commercial beekeeping being really busy, is that it adds a step. It's another thing you have to do. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit about some misconceptions we might have about control groups that maybe are holding you back from using control groups in your operation. So one of them is control does not have to mean untreated. Now I'll go through some proper controls next, but like untreated varroa controls are dead. Okay, so we don't want to be doing that. So control does not have to mean untreated. The other thing is it doesn't have to be the same number of hives. And again, this is something where you watch us researchers up on the stage. We do this all the time. We've got 20 treated hives, 20 controls. Okay. It doesn't have to be that way. So let's say there's something you're really confident in and you want to try it in your operation. You can do it to 90 yards and leave 10 yards as a control. Okay, that's okay. And also vice versa. If it's something you think is really risky, you can do it at a small number of hives and leave the rest as controls. So we don't need to be doing 50 and 50 of each if you are not completely confident in it or if you don't want to leave some in the control group. Okay. So I'm going to go over some other controls to really drive this in. So if you want to test a new varroa treatment, your control group is your old varroa treatment. Okay. It's not untreated. If you want to test supplement or nosema treatment, these are generally put in sugar water. So you want to have a sugar only control so that we're not comparing some hives that had, a cup of sugar dumped on them with some hives that weren't open and didn't get a cup of sugar dumped on them. You want to test new pollen patties, your control groups, your old patties, or maybe, you never used to use patties before. So your control groups, no patties, but then you want to open the other hives because we often are putting patties on March 15th when it's 4 degrees out and we can chill hives. So you might as well flip some lids and simulate it, right? If you want to test pollen traps, your control group would be deactivated pollen traps because pollen traps fundamentally change how bees go into a beehive. Queen excluders. If you want to test queen excluders, if you think, you're getting lots of honey in your brood chambers because of them, your control group is actually nothing for those because we do not, thankfully, have a non-queen excluding queen excluder that you can use as your control group. Okay. And so just for my final driving home of why you should use treatment groups, I'm going to go back to my beekeeper friend who did this project. And so in this case, Formic Pro was the thing he'd used before. That's his control group. He tried out HopGuard and Thymovar. But if he hadn't done that, if he just blanket treated his operation with one thing, this is all the data he'd have. So he wouldn't have known the relative usefulness of HopGuard, and he might have gone forward with using this because he'd be like, oh, 25%, that's better than the Alberta average. And so by using more, by including a control, and actually another one here, he was able to get more information and, inform his choices for the next year. And so now we're going to switch into some measurements and tips. Okay, so I'm going to put up my thing here again and say I'm not here to tell you to start recording data. If you're wanting to just use your judgment, that is 100% fine. I have respect for that. Please use a control, but we're done with controls now. If you do want to record some data, I have some information for you too. Measurements. So frames of bees or frames of brood. This is one that us researchers use all the time. And this is one lots of times you beekeepers are instinctively using anyway. Okay. Another measurement you can use is the number of supers or seconds given. So when I worked at commercial beekeeping, when we were doing queen checking in the spring, say I was queen checking singles, all the good singles would get a second. The rest didn't, so that we knew we needed to check them next time. Same with when we were checking doubles, all the good doubles would get a super, the rest didn't, and we check them later. So that's the sort of thing that's indicative of the strength and the quality of the yard that your crew leader can just write down at the end of the yard and get you some really easy data. Okay. Like I said, lots of respect for beekeeper judgment. If you're wanting to kind of formalize that more, you could try some 1 to 5. You don't have to. And like I said, wintering mortality is a good measurement. We need to have some huge sample sizes to find effects using it, but it's a really great way to measure anything that you're doing in the fall because it's really the #1 economic outcome of your fall choices. And so the #1 economic outcome of your spring choices is often your honey. And so if we want to talk about some honey measurements, these are some you can do. A simple one is number of frames of honey. Now, I don't know if you people in Manitoba are like the people in Saskatchewan where you've got, you're pulling 6 supers off at a time. Then this measurement is going to be crap for you. But if you're only getting 1 or 2 and you go early in the honey flow, it's pretty easy to say, oh yeah, 3 frames of honey, 6 frames of honey, so on. Another measurement can just be if you're doing it off larger numbers of hives, well, how many supers needed to be pulled from those yards. You also have the option to weigh supers, getting a little bit more complicated again. I've seen that done in fields. You just put the scale on the truck. I've also seen it where you label them and then you could do that as the extracting line. That's a little bit, of a less hectic situation. In my experience, the guys putting the boxes on the extracting line generally have a little bit of extra time. So that's one way to do it. You can also, if we're doing some of these larger designs, you can just weigh whole pallets using your barrel scale. Seems to be a good way to do that. Okay, and then one other honey measurement I want to talk about is weight gain. So you can weigh the whole colony at 2 time points during the honey flow, and you can use that a metric for honey production. And obviously, you can't be supering in between, so you want to do ones, you want them to be undisturbed for a while. I've done this 2 weeks, but it depends on your beekeeping system. And I know that some of you in Manitoba, I've seen on YouTube, have these really fun trucks with the that can actually just pick up a stack of hives. So maybe, doing weight gain is a little bit easier for you. But, generally weighing hives isn't that easy of a thing, which is why I want to highlight this Hivetronics scale. And so I got to give credit to the Alberta Tech Transfer Program, who took this video and allowed me to use it here. But they have this scale, and it really just kind of works like a pallet jack. And there, she's just weighed that hive, and it's going to the other one's iPhone. And it depends on bottom board designs, and sometimes you have to do a little bit of finagling, but it works with a lot of different bottom boards. And as a researcher who's weighed a ton of hives in their life, there's not much that makes me as excited as this scale. I also just want to say it's made in Canada. And this guy's an electronics professor from the East Coast. He does this as a passion project. So, here's his email if anyone's interested. Really can't recommend this scale enough. So, all right, I'm going to take some more water as we transition into Varroa measurements. So if you're wanting to measure Varroa, this is our old standby. We all got one of these, I would think. And, it was the first thing we had to monitor Varroa mites easily, right? And it works great for monitoring, it lets you know if you have a problem or not. I don't find it's great for research because the liquid kind of strains through here and the bees sit up here. We get a lot of mites stuck in the bees up here. So your mite counts can be super variable, and you're missing a lot of mites when you use this one. Okay, and also I just took from BeeMade. These are their pictures. I'm not trying to sell these things. It was just, I couldn't crop out the prices. And then we have these other options. And these two options, really, the bees are kind of in the water, and then you're swirling them. And that works really well because the mites kind of drop to the bottom, and they're not getting stuck in the bees as well. Now, this one has an awful lid. And this one, I've got some beekeepers in Alberta here who sing its praises. They really like it. They say it comes with clear instructions. It also comes with electronics or instructions in Spanish, which is useful. And then we also have, I just ordered this one. This comes from Lynae Ovinge. He's made this. I'm going to go back and show it to you again. And so those are just like some Starbucks cups. It's a pretty simple cup, but the shaker is all designed to be field worthy. So you can take this to the field with you. It runs on a 12-volt battery, and it's all made by Lynae Ovinge. And he sent it to a beekeeper I was working with. And I find this one works really well. And if you have a reason to be wanting to be doing the shakes in your bee yards, it's a really great system for that. And it's got like a 30-second timer on it. Another way to do Varroa measurements that I have to show off is I work with these beekeepers, and they built a Milwaukee bee vacuum for me. So this was inspired by Lynae Ovinge, but also Ian Stepler, but they kind of took it a step forward and actually use a Milwaukee vacuum. They could work on Milwaukee power packs, and they actually didn't destroy the vacuum. The vacuum can still work as well. And then this jar just suctions to it. But so we use this to take bee samples, when we were putting patties on March 15th, and we didn't want to be pulling frames to get Varroa samples so that we could do a Varroa trial. And so that, bee vacuum's another way to do research at some interesting times of the year. And finally, I want to talk about one other Varroa monitoring tool you can use to try out your Varroa trials. And this is a bit of a weird one, or new one. And so I'm going to call it an oxalic speedy sticky board. And it does not have a name, but that's what I'm calling it. And I know 3 beekeepers in Alberta who do this. And I've never heard of it anywhere else. I've not seen it on, the forums or anything. But essentially, when you're using a sticky board is usually natural fall. So you're just monitoring the bees, the mites that are falling all the time. And so then you have to leave it in for lots of days, and you get all this other crap on the boards, and and you're just getting natural fall. So what they find is if they just use an oxalic vapor gun to get a much faster drop. So they'll combine it with oxalic vapor, and then they put in their sticky board, and they just use the political sign materials. So if anyone's like excited by this, on Monday you could do this for really cheap. And then also Crisco or Vaseline, they coat it really fast, and then they'll collect it with 12 to 24 hours later. So it's really fast. And it's a way to, it's essentially, if you can think of it as a giant Varroa shake, if you're doing a Varroa shake on the whole hive, by blasting it with oxalic, you should get most of the mites that are on the bees. It allows you to know kind of all the mites that were on the bees in that hive at that point. Obviously, there's lots of mites in the brood, but it's a good monitoring tool and a very inventive one. And the thing I want to point out is that it's really useful when you need to monitor lower levels of mites, okay? So this is a lower one, and those are all the mites we see. I think I counted 21 or something. And this came from a hive that had a Varroa shake of 0. And this is a problem I get as researcher. I'm trying to do research and I'm getting a ton of zeros, and comparing zeros to each other doesn't work in research. But by using this, we can really start to monitor those lower levels of mites that we're wanting to kick back to keep our mite populations as low as possible. So they could use this tool to, do it before and after Apivar and see how that worked. Now, I'm going to have another tip here, or moving from measurements to tips. Packages or splits. Anytime you're buying packages or making splits, they're really just look if there's an easy research trial you can run with them, because they're small. They start off similar size. Often they'll have the same queens. It's just really easy to do research on them. They're easier to treat. They're easier to measure effects. It's just easier to detect effect of anything in a small hive than in like a big booming double. So that's a useful tip. Another tip is these hive tracking cards. I know about these because of Manitoba Beekeepers. I've seen Ian Stepler using them and Phil, and it's a way you can track which of your queens that you're buying causes higher winter losses. You can do all kinds of tracking using these hive cards. Those codes at the bottom, you might be able to use that to say which hives have which treatments. And then this one on the right, this been's blowing up my Instagram and my Facebook for many days, and it's from Germany, and it's another kind of hive tracking card that you can use. So we're going to go into some more research ideas now, examples that, if you're like, oh, this sounds good, I want to do some research. I know I've talked about lots of different ideas already, but just some other ones. So these are some designs we're looking at. So let's say we're using half apiary. Let's have one half of the apiary have those nice light frames that have come down out of supers if you're running deeps, and then compare that with this dark old comb that your grandpa had. And then you can hive packages into that as a really great one for packages, because you're already having to make a choice about which comb to hive those on. And so we have kind of over here the level of measurement. So just start off, you can just do that beekeeper judgment of the quality and strength between the halves of the yards, right? We want to get more complicated, we can do some sort of honey measurement on the halves of the yard. And then if we want to get even more complicated and write down data, we can look at how much disease we have in each half a yard. You do that on 6 apiaries, you should get an answer about, whether or not there's a difference between these two types of frames in your operation. Another thing is pollen patties. Let's say we want to look at pollen or patties with pollen. and compare those to patties without pollen because they're cheaper. And we're going to do that in half apiaries. This is a really great design for half apiaries because pollen varies so much from yard to yard. We're going to try this on some overwintered hives, whether that's singles, doubles, doesn't matter much. Our number one is just going to be judging the difference, using your beekeeper judgment to look at the quality and strength between each half of the yard. And then also, you can also just look, well, which patties did they eat better? And then, if you want to get more complicated, you can actually do some bees and brood frame counts. And also you could actually weigh the patties and see which ones they've weighed more. Okay. Another example, this is between apiaries type design. Let's look at our normal fall treatment, and then let's say, you know what, this isn't cutting it. We need better Varroa control and compare it to using 2 different fall treatments. Okay, so this might up your survival a bit. We're looking at doubles going into fall. And just like I talked about with my beekeeper friend, an easy measurement of that is mortality. So just look at the deads in the spring. But if we want to get more complicated, we can start measuring Varroa between those groups. And also we can look at the queen status after the treatment, because we know we have some treatments out there that can kill more queens. Similar idea, fall doubles, but let's look at, using a supplement in fall or using a nosema treatment in fall, and then comparing that to nothing. Now, this could be the other way. So maybe you normally use a nosema treatment in the fall, but you want to look at not using it. I'm not recommending this either way. I just know that there's beekeepers that do both. Okay, so we compare the sugar control and the nosema treatment, or the some other fall supplement, and our first measurement can just be mortality. And then maybe we can, if we want to get more complicated, just count frames of bees in the spring. Okay, so some ideas I haven't mentioned yet. Anything that's requiring your money or your time that you're doing in your operation that you're not confident in is definitely something that you can research to figure out if that's worth your money, if that's worth your time, and if maybe there's a better option. Okay, another option, another thing you can look at, which is going to be a big one for many of you, is your queen sources. And also queen treatments, which I have to give a shout out right now to Dallin Animal Health. They sent me this yesterday, and this will be going out in all the bee magazines in the next couple months, but they have a special promotion because they sell a bee vaccine for AFB. And they really want to encourage Canadian beekeepers to experiment with it. And so they're greatly reducing the price of the vaccine. And so if you're interested in that, in experimenting with it, give Everett right here an email, and that's, that's a good way to, do some experiments in your operation around queen treatments. I do need to go forward, actually. So that's an option. Also, we've queen cage types, removing or not removing your attendants. That seems to be something that everyone does, and even a small difference for that could be worth the money. Days before you release your queens, comb disinfecting, winter wrap designs, top entrance designs. Wind fences is one that, of course, was suggested by one of our Southern Alberta beekeepers. And some other helpful tips. For data, Excel or the notes on the iPhone, those are easy and they sync. So if you're having your crew leader record these information, you could be back at the honey house and see it on your phone that it's coming through, if there's somewhere with service. Also keep yearly reports. You don't need to be making graphs or whatever, but just saying, in 2023, we compared these 2 things and this is what we find. So when you, go back in 10 years and you want to know, then I think it's really great to have one employee in charge. That's mostly how the successful bee farms I know seem to manage it. Just less, confusion that way. And obviously start off small. If you've never done research before, just find a little easy project that's going to give you a good answer. And, that's the way to go forward. So I'd really got to give a shout out to my beekeeper friends who tell me about what they do and let me pick their brain about this kind of stuff. Feel free to give me an email if you have any questions about how to proceed. I know that was a lot of information, but I'm always happy to answer questions. And I know there's a lot of different ways to move forward with research. So if you have any other specific questions, feel free to give me a shout at that email. And with that, I'd like to take any questions that you guys have. And I'm just going to point out that this is my son, and this is where he decided to sit. I thought it was very cute. So thank you.
All right. Thanks, Lynae. I think first I'm just going to read through a few of the comments, and then I have a few comments of my own I'd like to share. And anyone, if they have questions now, please put it in the chat so we can get to it. Just looking at some of the comments that came in, Phil says, I see that I've relied too much on the in-pallet design. And yeah, I guess that's something that, again, in my background doing commercial beekeeping, it's something I did as well. A next beekeeper just commented on the photo saying, parking the vehicle in between the bee yards, they find that during heavy flight, they can't find their home and are a little more prone to drifting. Phil says that the next batch of hive cards he will order will likely be RFID enabled, and he'll try to organize that later this fall. In terms of the oxalic speedy sticky board, Ian says that this could be tried with Formic Pro as well, or sorry, not Formic Pro, Formic. You'd want the flash release on that. From Longman Apiaries, I just mentioned that BP growers hives come with RFID. And again, from Ian, he says he likes that idea with the speedy sticky board drops. The washes, the shakes don't work in the spring because the number of mites are too low, and a flash drop would work well. So thank you for the idea. I guess just building off of that, I'd like to say with the oxalic speedy sticky boards, I want to mention that sticky boards can be quite expensive, but there are ways to make them yourself. And one really good idea that's out there is from the University of Guelph. They have a video on it, and they take file folders and they paint with a paint roller Crisco on top. So you melt it, paint it on top. So that's a really cheap way to make up your own sticky boards. With the Varroa shaker, I was wondering, Lynae, do you know what the price point is for the Oliver one?
Yeah, actually, so those cups are very cheap. I think he sells 10 for $20. But for that Varroa shaker, it was $3.50 American, and so we managed to have it all shipped to us in Canada for about 500 American. So one shaker plus 20 cups, 500 American into Canada with shipping, or into Alberta. So that was good. Yeah. Can I?
I've heard. Oh, I was going to say I've heard a lot about it, and I guess I'm used to using a platform orbital shaker, which is very similar, but the platform's a bit larger. So you could actually just, if you fix up the right type of platform, you could put about 10 or 15 shakes on one at once. So you don't need to, again, shake one at a time. You could actually do 10 at a time. So if it's costing $300 for a cheaper orbital shaker or $500, I think compared to a lot of the equipment we buy, there's a lot of good value in there, because if you're getting 15 results from that bee yard easy, that might help quite a bit. So
yeah, the one thing is, like, so it shakes for 30 seconds, and that's really as fast as it takes you to read the previous one and dump it out. And so that you can have the next one shaking at a time. So yeah, I've used the bigger ones in labs as well, but then it takes me a long time to do them all. So I did find it very fast. It was as fast as I can work as one person, for sure.
That's super interesting. Yeah, it's
I
only
also
30
was
seconds.
buying it. I was buying it for a beekeeper, so I liked the idea that he could take it to the field if he wanted to, which is how Randy Oliver designed it. Was for, I of course wound up using it inside, but And yeah, I wanted to address a couple of the comments you had. So Phil Beeman said that the impallet, or he's been relying too much on it. I really tried to drive that home that it's not wrong to use that design. And I think lots of beekeepers use that design because it's what's modeled for you by the researchers. But I just wanted to give those bigger designs for beekeepers who were not trying research because they didn't have time to do the impallet design. I think you get great results with the impallet design. That's why I asked researchers do it. But yeah, for beekeepers who just won't do research because they don't have time to be labeling hives, I had the other options. Yeah, and then yeah, I really liked what Ian said about the speedy sticky boards. And I just got to give 100% credit. Those are 3 Alberta beekeepers who came up with that. It's not me. I just love talking to beekeepers and finding out what they're doing. And a lot of times we just need more information to get out there about. I think every time I have a question, there's a beekeeper who knows the answer to it. I just need to find the right beekeeper. So, yeah.
I'll let you read Phil's question or a comment and question on the screen there.
A lot of our work falls is equalization using strong hives to boost the weak ones. We lose a lot of potential learning by not letting the best excel and dragging the bad ones along. Thoughts? Yeah, I mean, I kind of come from a background of canola pollination where we have to do this for grading. So it's not really the best area. But you also have to do swarm control, which I'm sure you're aware of. But I personally think that large hives come with a lot of problems. Those really huge booming hives are hard to control mites in. They're hard to stop from swarming. They're hard to, and so using smaller things, these 6 frames over 6 frame nukes that the guys in Saskatchewan like, or using singles, I think that they can be really efficient as well. But they're not those really boomers, and that's kind of what I like. I don't know if that answered that question that well, but.
The next one is interesting here. It says, I've always thought a control had to be a non-treated control. Wouldn't running a control, like a positive control or just something lesser, wouldn't that add additional factors?
So yeah, I mean, I think this is something you learn when you watch researchers. And yeah, I mean, we often will use a non-treated control and we will use a positive control because we really need to tease out those effects and the whole, like, so if you think about how well does Apivar work in comparison to not doing anything at all, that's something that we want to know as researchers, right? But as a beekeeper, you need to know, how can you make your bees more healthy? And so a non-treated control doesn't result in any healthy bees, but so that's why I advocate for just using you have to use some sort of control, but it can be the thing that you previously used. It doesn't have to be untreated. And I'm glad that, this is something that Ian thought, because it's good that I made the point, because I think that's what a lot of beekeepers think. And it stops them from doing, research. But no, your control can be just kind of the standard that's in the area. I mean, obviously it changes depending on, all those ones I showed, but it doesn't have to be an untreated control. As a beekeeper, having an untreated varroa control doesn't really help you make a decision about Apivar, right? But, comparing Apivar and Formic Pro, that helps you make a decision going forward. So that's why I was advocating for it.
Yeah, I love that approach of keeping it practical and making it possible for beekeepers to do the research.
Yeah.
I
mean, if doing research is costing you money, by having untreated controls or costing hive deaths, I mean, that's not going to help anyone do research either, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I just wanted to point out a couple of other things you said that I really like. Comparing zeros to each other doesn't work. I think that's important, and I do want to explore more of those speedy sticky drops to try to see what I can find out myself. And the other thing was keeping yearly reports. Yeah, I just talking to beekeepers, and I know they've segregated different treatments in different yards for Varroa, and then looking at the winter mortality, and it seems like in some cases they had clear results, but it's just a matter of taking a few minutes to formalize it into a yearly report a little bit, or just keeping a good record of it at the end of the year. It doesn't need to be elaborate. That seems to me very important. If there's any more questions, you can put it in the chat now. Lynae, did you have anything you missed come to mind that you wanted to cover, or are you all good?
Yeah, I guess I'd elaborate on what Ian just said. And yeah, sometimes your control is untreated. Like I mentioned, the experiment I showed, let's look at fall fumagillin versus not fall fumagillin, or I called it fall nosema control versus, that was an untreated control. And sometimes that's, there, but especially in the case of Varroa trials, I think untreated controls are huge obstacles to beekeeper doing research. And because they result in so many viruses, and that could take years to come down, and because it can result in hives dying, I really think they should only be done when they have to be done for regulatory reasons. Sometimes we have to do untreated Varroa controls for that. But
Great. All right. Well, thank you so much for your time. This will be posted online, so people will be able to go back and review it and write down some of these ideas. And we'll wish everybody a good evening and good luck with the beekeeping season. And I hope people can use some of these, these tips and tools to come back with some helpful, some interesting insights and results at the end of the year, and make sure to tell us about it. So be good to hear.
yes, thank you for having me, and I wish all of Manitoba a very great spring beekeeping season too. So,
all right, thank you.
thank you.
Good night.